my house falls in price, or I lose my job and my house falls in price, and I can't pay back the loan at the bank. And times tens of thousands, millions of people doing that, and then the banks can't pay their loan to another bank. The whole thing is based on that all around the world. So if you allow deflation broadly to happen from the existing monetary system, it collapses. In fact, the same reason is why
I am so happy to be talking to you, Jeff. I'm a huge fan. I've watched so many of your presentations and followed you on Twitter for a while, and it's been super great to be able to interact with you on Twitter and now have this conversation. So I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks for joining. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I love what you're doing and taking the message to lots more people. So well done.
Thank you, appreciate it. I don't know if you saw the cover banner on my Twitter page, but it's a train engine and a horse, and it's that phrase that you have of you can't judge a system within a system. That's one of my favorite metaphors and all that. So anyway, that's something fun there. So I just love to dive right into it. I'd love to hear how you came to Bitcoin. Well, I suppose first, I think before we have to come to Bitcoin, I think we have to talk about the way world is today and how we've gotten to this point. So I would love to hear how you got to this thesis, because what I love when I listen to you speak about this problem is that you dive right to the heart of the issues. And I think one of the reasons, using me as an example, I think one of the reasons why people have enjoyed what I've posted on Twitter and YouTube is because at least so far, I've not been shaking my fist at any individual person. I've been discussing the deep core issues of a system, of the system. And that's something that I think you do as well. And so I'd love to hear, how did you realize this? Like, at what point did you discover that? And then how did you make that transition to Bitcoin from there?
Yeah, so this has probably been something that I've been talking about for over 10 years now. And it was really out of my technology businesses that I couldn't understand why prices weren't falling everywhere if technology was essentially the base layer of everything, or we were solving problems and making things better. Then I could see in my own business that what once cost me, say, 50 people building for 2 years, then was completely free. So why wouldn't that apply to all businesses? And in that paradigm, why weren't prices falling generally? And so when something for me doesn't click, I have to chase it all the way to the ground. I can't stop. And so it was something that was gnawing at me, and I just kept on asking questions, kind of at a first principle, and it seemed really strange that, and some things that just everybody knows. They'll say on one hand and then completely disregard it in a different statement. And here's an example. People know that prices fall to the marginal cost of production. Economists know that, and you can regulate an industry to stop that from happening inside your own country or inside your own state, but it still keeps on happening outside of your state or country, and then your industry gets killed by someone else in a different area. So over a long term, there is actually no way to stop that process from happening. Prices fall to the marginal cost of production, and people can say that, right? And understand that. And we can go into why that's true, but they can understand that at a rational level, and then simultaneously say we need inflation for a productive economy, and it's ludicrous. They're totally two different forces, and so I find it fascinating how we can delude ourselves, and concurrently believe two complete opposite statements can be true at the same time.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think when speaking of dilution, I think one of the things that is increasingly absurd about the way the world works today is that financial advisors, managers, and professionals just in general, when I listen to them and hear them talk, that they don't really understand what's happening at the technological level. And it seems that as our world is becoming increasingly dependent on these digital systems and these faster and faster systems, that it seems to me we should be relying less and less on models of how the past worked and more on understanding what's next. Because as the speed of that change increases, it seems that those voices are dramatically undervalued when it comes to trying to estimate what the future is going to look like, which is why I really appreciate what you're doing. So.
And mine's, it's difficult for your mind to change. You have to remain open and curious to change your mind. The normal is to apply your model of the world, and then apply new information and disregard information that doesn't match that, or to change the information in some way to ensure your model is correct, because you yourself couldn't be wrong. So you constantly are looking for, and that's just a way I would say most people look at the world, and similar reason why the car changed, or we rode horses for thousands of years, and the automobile changed that. It's why most times people can't see a new technology, how it could radically offer them something different, because they try to attach that to their existing model.
Yeah, so of course, Bitcoin is a major topic I want to speak about, but before we get into that, and after that we get into, I'd love to hear your thoughts on societal implications, all that, and I have a few questions for you that I don't know if you've answered before, maybe you have, but before we get to that, I'd love to address what you just said about the current paradigms that we're in right now. So there was a quote that I heard you say recently about the current paradigm we're in, because I think that when we're in a certain technological stage, we don't really realize that we're in it, because that's just what we're used to. And so something you said about the world we are in today is that we are currently in a paradigm that nobody wants to question because it points guilt at us, and the emergent complex nature of behavior in society is based upon theft directly. And so most people, they hear that, and if they haven't heard it before, or they haven't tried to figure out what that means, that sounds really offensive to them, and it sounds extremely difficult for them to understand. So could you explain fundamentally why the current paradigm inherently has that form of theft at the base layer of society? For those that may not understand.
So let's start with where I started before. Prices fall to the marginal cost of production. So what we do as a species, or we are constantly looking for ways to save our time and find ways to create better and better ways to remove errors, right? And the output of all of that work throughout society is a deflationary force, because if it wasn't, we probably wouldn't use it, right? On the other side of we're on one side we're the seller, and on the other side, on the same side, we're the buyer. There's not two different people. In one part of our life, we want all the prices to come down, and that's how we vote with all of our time. Or not just necessarily prices to come down, to get more for less, right? We want more value, and that's how we vote with all of our time. Yet we believe we can live in a system that works exactly opposite to that. So let's walk through that process and how that works. Prices falling to the marginal cost of production. When you use a calculator app today, the calculator app is not free because of advertising. The calculator app is free because there's 50 or so calculator apps on the App Store, and entrepreneurs have chased the price down to 1 penny and less, and now free, until it falls to free. And while there's 1 penny or 2 pennies or 3 pennies, another entrepreneur in another part of the world will take their time and try to create the next efficiency and try to make that better. But once they drop to free, nobody can create that efficiency anymore, and it just becomes free, and those entrepreneurs move off to the next thing. And and that's just the way that competitive force of a market is constantly trying to attack things where there's an economic value, in service to you to make the price, in service to them try to create value by delivering you value. And it's all over. That's why all your photos are free today. That's why this Riverside app is free that we're using right now to tape. And it's seeing, and now instead of hundreds of people seeing a message, millions of people can see a message. It has way, and by the way, I'm talking right now, artificial intelligence, where that goes and how many messages you're going to be bombarded in, because it's free to do so. And it'll change your mind based on a centralized control, has dramatic implications that people haven't thought through yet. We'll go into that later. But because that price constantly tries to reduce, that force tries to reduce its price, well, there's economic value, prices fall. Now, that means that just use photos and calculator app and all of the other things on your phone, and the things like this Riverside app, where do those show up in GDP? The point is they don't. The point is they're net negative GDP because prices fall to zero, or prices fall to almost zero or zero, and they don't show up in GDP. So as you're if you're measuring your economy by GDP to pay back $400 trillion of debt that is already insolvent, and if prices fall, then the real cost of the debt explodes. It's harder to pay back. Then you have to, as a byproduct, manipulate money at a faster and faster rate to be able to, because there's less things in GDP, right? And so now why Saylor would say inflation is a vector is because of that. You would have deflation everywhere everywhere in the world. It would fall, prices fall in everything. You know that chart that people look at, and hospital expenses going up, healthcare going up, food prices going up, house prices going up,
Yes.
and then lots of other things going down.
Yeah.
All of those things would go down,
Yes.
just at different rates, depending on how much technology was in those things. But all of those things would go down in a normal, in normal. But even so, that chart itself has the misrepresentation of printed money in it, which manipulates some of those things at a way higher rate. And what you're doing is really stealing the productivity that should flow to society in the form of lower prices, and you're concentrating it in essentially big centralized organizations or government to be able to protect you.
Anyone that has the ability to protect and
Yeah.
have that ability is then able to do that.
Yeah.
If there is a will, there is a way, essentially, and if there's a way for them to do that, then it's inevitable. And I think that's something that has not dawned yet on the majority of people. I think most people still are viewing the world from terms of GDP, and when they think, okay, this person of my political organization or this person I really respect or whomever it is that's in power, they are valuing the total wealth of the world in terms of what I am calling political currency units that we make up, that we call the GDP. And they say, depending what that number is now, is dependent on, it's a direct result of my person being in power. And I think people don't realize that the productivity gains are flowing in the wrong direction because they don't realize that the whole way of valuing wealth and productivity is flawed inherently. GDP going up is not the value of the global wealth going up. It's saying all the stuff in the world, the exchange rate is this amount of numbers on the ledger of the government's currency. So
Yeah, it's a false ledger. So when you asked why is the emergent complex behavior built on theft, it's essentially the only reason that prices don't fall is because we vote for a system that says no matter what, make them rise. Right? A false ledger. And no matter who you are on top of that system, it's this theater on top of that system. So once you understand that, and you realize and this is hard to hear, but it's true, right? most of the people that are kind of using that power, fame, fortune, or power, based on theft, without calling it out, it doesn't actually matter if it's Elon Musk on one side or Elizabeth Warren on the same other side. It's exactly the same thing. They're appealing to their base, how smart they are and how great they are going to save them from a position of theft that enriches them. And unless you're going to call that out, and unless you're going to call out the base problem, then for me, I've just kind of tuned out. I've just because it's impossible to solve from that system.
Yeah. Now, some people would say, Jeff, that means you're in a cult and that you're just ignoring the world and that you don't know what you're talking about, or whatever, with absolute statements like that. So when you say something like that it is inherently theft, could you emphasize how that's the case and
Sure.
how because I think a lot of people use inflation theft as a political jargon tool, and I think what's different about what you and folks like you emphasize is that it's literally theft. Like it can't not be theft. So could you
Yeah. Yeah, so now, and that's why you have to think kind of at a different level and not let the theft grab you or grab it or use it as a political tool. What you have to think about it is, what I try to do is ask a simple question. It's easier for people to see or explain it to themselves when you ask a question. And if you ask what rate of inflation is required, right? Or if you ask, is inflation theft, right? You don't have a vote for it, right? No, in a democratic society, you don't vote for inflation. So who gets to decide how much money is being manipulated? And why wouldn't they tell you exactly what it is going to look like? Based on that, who wins, who loses, because inflation is the same as the other side of the coin as wage deflation. So if you know it's it's the same thing, and so some people win. If you have more assets, you win, and if you have more of your money in wages or productivity or savings, then you lose. Then you can see it's just a theft because some people get to decide how much should we change the ledger. And you would see this if the numbers weren't as big. So if let's say there's 8 billion people in the world and there's 8 billion monetary units, and this trick was harder because there's only 8 billion monetary units. If you had one of those monetary units, and I had half of one, right? Somebody else had two. And all of a sudden one day, there were 16 billion monetary units. If your two didn't go to 4, you lost,
Yeah.
right? Or if somebody else's, or if your 1 didn't go to 2, you lost. But if your 1 went to 1.75, you might think I'm winning, right?
Because
And
you have more now than you used to.
Exactly. Because you're measuring through a ledger that's being changed, and it's just made up to be able to, and it's being made up to essentially keep you on a loop of more and more jobs for less and less wages, to be able to grow forever from a system of manipulation. It's so ludicrous, but the numbers are so big. Now instead of saying 8 billion monetary units, you're talking trillions. I would just have people on this show just go and Google a million versus a billion versus a trillion, and just get a picture in your mind of what that looks like, with just an image search on Google, and you'll see how it breaks your brain, right? And now talk about $400 trillion. You talk about the amount of stimulus that's coming in that you have no idea. It's just a faulty ledger. So that faulty ledger is just theft. I wish it wasn't, but it is. And you have no vote in it.
I agree, and I think in addition to that, it's not just that we have a unit bias of trying to figure out of what something's conversion rate is because these numbers are so big that it's hard for us to conceive. I think an additional problem that our brains have is that we think in linear terms and not logarithmic terms. So, like for example, gas prices are really popular and controversial right now, and a gallon of gas, is what, $3-4 now, whereas 100 years ago it was a nickel, a dime, quarter, whatever it was. And I think most people look at that change and they think it went from 25 cents to $4, so maybe in a few decades it'll be $8, whereas they don't realize the price is not going to double. The price has gone up by a factor of 20, and so if it's gone from a quarter to $4, well, that same series of orders of magnitude, that same rate of growth in the future is not just a mere doubling. It's a logarithmic trend. It's not an exponential one.
Yeah, and that's what I called out in my book. And you had an exponential trend of technology, and that it had to be matched by an exponential trend in monetary easing or printing money. Otherwise, the entire system collapsed because the debt was already insolvent. And so you could, whether it was COVID, whether it's something else, you can guarantee the money has to come in, right? Yeah. And it has to fill that hole. Ironically, I think people have it backwards. The technology was driving first, and the offset in how much easing is to try to stop that, or to try to delay the inevitable, and is creating a worse and worse outcomes for everyone on this planet, or most people on this planet. Some people are enriched by it.
Yeah. One question that I've had from other people when they've been trying to understand your thesis and your ideas of central banking versus technology is people are trying to understand, why is it so binary? Why is it that we cannot have this idea of theft and central banking and technology being deflationary? Why can they not coexist? People can buy the idea of it being theft, but why does one inherently make the other unsustainable to where they both can't survive?
So a credit-based system gets more expensive to pay the debt back with deflation. So if the debt is already insolvent and you allow deflation to happen, the entire thing is based on counterparty risk, right? And my house falls in price, or I lose my job and my house falls in price, and I can't pay back the loan at the bank, and times tens of millions of people doing that, and then the banks can't pay their loan to another bank. The whole thing is based on that all around the world. So if you allow deflation broadly to happen from the existing monetary system, it collapses. In fact, the same reason is why central banks never can remain independent over time. Because if you imagine that happening, like you just imagine what's happening right now, and if the U.S. keeps tightening, you will see deflation. But you won't see the type of deflation I'm talking about. You will see eventually kind of credit collapse type of inflation, which will cause them to amp up printing of money.
Well, we're already seeing that with Silicon Valley Bank and all the things that happened in March. They undid roughly 10 months of tightening in 2 weeks.
And think about how fast that happens, right?
It was overnight.
Exactly. That tightening, because it creates the event, it creates the credit crisis, that you have to have more liquidity. And so right now there's backdoor operations. Essentially, the Fed is saying who they're going to save, who they're not going to save. And the bigger game is a geopolitical game between China, Russia, and the U.S. But the system is becoming more and more unstable. And these decisions, centralized decisions, are having enormous knock-on effects. It is becoming more and more unstable. This likely goes on for a long time. The U.S. dollar, I think you know this too. U.S. dollar is not going to die tomorrow. In fact,
or 90 days.
Exactly, or 90 days. And the probabilities do increase for a nonlinear type of event, there's still really small probabilities right now for that type of event, in, like you said, in 90 days. Because what's more likely to happen is a different country has to devalue their currency and hyperinflate their currency, and then they want US dollars, and then their labor becomes way cheaper for the US to be able to drag more, essentially strip mine their labor and resources to be able to feed the machine. So that is a higher likelihood outcome for other countries all around. And you have to ask yourself, even if you think about Bitcoin, why isn't everybody in Venezuela on Bitcoin when they have 100% year-on-year inflation rate? And people just get comfortable in the system, and they think they can solve it from the system. So they do a whole bunch of other things to make the system stronger, when they could just walk across in an open monetary network. But our minds don't change that fast. And so it's highly likely that this happens in waves, with more and more adoption and more, and the rails to Bitcoin is strong. It's still extremely positive for Bitcoin, but it's not like an overnight hyper Bitcoinization like many people think.
I wonder if, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I have a similar view. I don't think it's going to happen immediately, but I do think that it will happen in waves, and those waves will get bigger and bigger and bigger, like tides coming into shore, more
Agreed.
or less.
Yep.
These waves of increasing liquidity, decreasing liquidity, and these waves will probably grow, and the degree of absurdity in each wave will probably grow. And then I think eventually, when there's some sort of critical mass, let's say, then I think perhaps there could be some sort of escape velocity. I don't think it's anytime soon, but I wonder if that's the case.
I think that's exactly the case, and that's why through Ego Death, that's where we're investing in the companies building the rails to be able to take billions of people onto this network.
Yeah, could we, before we get into Bitcoin, why it fixes the theft, and the societal implications of that, I'd love to talk a little bit more about, especially particularly in your experience, because I'm sure you've seen so much change in the technological world the last couple of decades. But one of my main pains and frustrations and fears as well with this inflation theft paradox that we have is looking at historical examples. And one of the most horrible ones to me is that of World War II, and that, most people don't know this because it's not particularly taught. But with the hyperinflation in Germany being, in my view, being one of the, basically, the way I would put it would be that the hyperinflation in Germany, or Weimar Republic in the 20s, basically shattered societal trust in Germany. And in that weakness, in that desperation, they were more willing to faction off into people that, as you say, promised the world getting better, promised everyone recovering, and some of them decided to attack class, like the communists, and others, ethnic groups like the fascists. And World War II is an example. In the beginning, with the inflation in Germany, and then during the war, when Hitler was trying to force Britain into a banking crisis by actually putting British banknotes in British currency and aerating and dumping into the British system, trying to force Britain to go down with inflation. Like that to me is that pinnacle example of the poison that is inflation, that it forced people, or it aided in people getting to that point of desperation, and then it became essentially a weapon of the war to a certain degree. And then there's theories that extended the war by a certain degree of time and all that. And so whether it's war, whether it's theft, that's my personal concern, is that if in these waves, and if in that point that we have some sort of hyperbolic event, what are your primary concerns within the fiat system? I know obviously we'll get to the more optimistic point there, but for me, I think the rate of technology changing gives both opportunity and threat. And I wonder what you think those large threats are, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
So let's start with your first thing, and I think in my book, I explained exactly this process and World War II in it creating us versus them. And if you look at your Twitter feed, or if you look at other feeds, if you look at the crazy how people are elevating heroes, their hero, versus a different hero, on essentially that those all of those heroes are based on manipulated money and theft, and they're not advocating to remove it. They're advocating for more of it. Then you can see how easy it is to fall down that path, right? You see how easy it is. Look at a daily report on the news, and it's all us versus them, and that's how you hijack. That's how you gain power in the system. You create another weaker part of a group, and you say it's their fault. You hijack the power. Then you change the laws, and you take more power. And you serve your small group at the expense of others. And then when that doesn't work anymore, because a huge part of the population is missing out, that either flips back and forth. If you look at other countries, it flips back and forth through revolt, or it escalates to the next level, and you have to create a greater enemy outside your borders. If you look through the entire world right now, that's what's happening in the entire world. And every single action people are taking inside that system, with whoever they're choosing, whoever on top of that system, is reinforcing that system. It has profound implications, though, because no one would vote for a different system from that system. And that's why, because you couldn't. Because if somebody said, if a politician said, I'm going to let the whole thing collapse, you'd be out with your pitchforks to vote for more printing or more easing. You don't want to look deeper. And that's creating, there's this short-term bias that's constantly creating more and more fear as the world's driving itself off a cliff. And keep in mind, when go further, and this is actually going to be really important to why things like Nostr are critically important. It is not enough just to have the money that's decentralized and secure. Because if the communication channels are not decentralized and secure, if they're centralized, then in order to block the money, the communication channels will be used against you. And you think you're capable of not being influenced by artificial intelligence or what someone else says, but history proves very different, and your actions prove really differently. You wouldn't believe in all the same brands as you believe in if you weren't being able to be influenced. You wouldn't be, and so our minds change slowly. Now, let's say in an AI, I don't know if you saw that.
I did. It was very. It was very creepy, and that's a compliment.
Yeah. So that took 15 minutes, took zero cost. 1 month ago, it would have cost over $10,000 to create.
Real quick, for those that haven't seen, could you explain what that was?
So I created a video really where an AI from the future was warning us about what was happening right now, so people would understand what was happening. And so I created, and you can look at it on jeffbooth.ca, but you can, I created in 4 different pieces of AI, different versions of AI, one to create the avatar, one to create the script through GPT, one to create text to voice, and then a different one to stitch it all together. And it's remarkable. It could get better, it will get better. But now imagine, so that took 15 minutes. Nothing of my time compared to what you would have had to do to hire a studio just months ago to be able to try to create something like that. In 6 months, maybe a year, that will be doing it itself, and you could create essentially, if you had enough control of the AI, you could have objective function to be able to figure out how to change people's minds on X, right? And it'll measure how long you're on videos, how long you're on text, and then it'll keep changing to be able to ensure it's making sure that you are acting the way somebody else wants you to. And so if the communication channels are all centralized and money is not, what do you think what do you think the Fed would have to do to, let's use GitHub as an example, right? So if Microsoft gets an executive order to shut down certain pieces of technology that free people, Microsoft will have to comply. Just like the Chinese government, just like Apple complies with the Chinese government. And so it is, and so that's a very real reason why people should take what's happening and look at Nostr. And by the way, there's a huge benefit for individuals to get onto those programs, or those decentralized networks too right now, because it benefits them. But even if you just looked at the risk of the communication channels and what you will see out of the communication channels, centralizing that much power of AI in centralized organizations, the AI will be used against you, not for you. The only way the AI is actually going to be used for you is with Bitcoin.
And so, for someone that hears that and doesn't understand why Bitcoin alone is able to do that, why is Bitcoin unique in its ability to pivot these technologies that could be threats towards benefits for us? Why is Bitcoin unique in that sense? And is Bitcoin that foundational layer? Is it one of them, like money is one, communication is one, or is money the foundational layer?
Money is the foundational one, but because money is the foundational one and there's so much power in controlling money, then the next one above that to control money would be communication channels.
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned Hitler and World War II, the propaganda machine. And if you don't think you're in a propaganda machine, right, you're not looking hard enough. You're in a propaganda machine. And you just don't, it's hard to realize that you are in one too. And so I wrote an article called Finding Signal in a Noisy World that explains at depth, and some people need to read it like 3 or 4 times to be able to really comprehend that. But why Bitcoin was alone in being decentralized and secure, and what it sacrificed to be able to do so on the base layer. And assuming that holds, which I try to disprove all the time.
Me as well.
Assuming that holds, then nothing is going to stop Bitcoin over time. Now, it could be choke point, different things, stop communications, and it'll go underground and it'll come out the other side. But nothing will stop Bitcoin from advancing if that's the case. The more important thing is, why wouldn't you want it to? Like, I came to a conclusion in a long time now, probably 2 years ago, but even my own actions, and this is, and I would ask people that are listening to this to think through this too, but even my own actions, I had, let's call a certain portion in Bitcoin in self-custody, and most of my life was built in the fiat world. And most of my actions were in the fiat world. I was spending in fiat. I was advising companies in fiat. Most of my actions were there. And I realized, and I was one of the people that understood, like really understood the transition we were in. And I thought, wow, 90% of my actions are spent reinforcing the world I don't want to see. And I have to change that. So the reason for the venture capital fund in this space was to spend more of my time, spend the 90% of my actions on creating the world I wanted to see, versus talking about it. I wanted to actually take action, make that happen. But it's so easy. It's so easy to, okay, I'm safe because I have an allocation to Bitcoin and I'm going to spend all my time here. That's not going to be very safe, right? The world is going to change radically, and it's going to be, and I think we need to do more to think about where do we spend the time to transition that. I should probably highlight that just because the existing system is collapsing, so there is no deflationary collapse from the new system, right? And that's really important to note. It's just a slow transition, and all prices are falling forever when measured against a currency that can't be manipulated. just like should happen, prices falling to the marginal cost of production. So prices just keep falling in the new system. Reason why people think they're going up and down and everything else is from the manipulation of the existing system
Yeah.
and its impact on, like you say, unit bias. That because we measure everything from that, like you said, we measure gas prices, we measure house prices, we measure everything from that system, our jobs, everything from that system, when that system is becoming more and more unstable.
And I think it's not just about stability or instability too, which is, in my view, more of a financial view, but I think also just from a base layer technological view, I think that's also the case. If I am a person in the early 1800s and I'm wanting to get into the locomotive business, or I'm wanting to get in, stay in my business of raising and breeding and training horses, or, take any example, light bulb, candle, internet,
Yep,
newspaper,
exactly.
it's the same thing. It's like, and that's, I met somebody briefly yesterday, I didn't even catch their name, but they were talking about how they bought Bitcoin cheap and sold it later for more, and I was explaining to someone else I was with that people that are buying Bitcoin cheap and then selling it to make a profit don't understand that they actually have the exact same biases that people that think Bitcoin's a scam or that's worthless and never would touch it in a million years. It's the exact same bias, that they think that they're making money by taking profits in a technological paradigm that will only continue to fall in relative value to the new one. And
Yeah.
so it's not. I fully agree with you. Stability, instability, those financial terms, but I think it's even just a matter of paradigms. I mean,
Yeah, they're measuring getting rich in fiat dollars that are being manipulated, and so then where do I put that money, right?
Yeah.
And it's that treadmill of trying to find more and more areas that can outpace my money losing value, right? That's and it's a mug's game. Like lots of people are going to play it, but it's an insane game to play.
One thing, and this is more of a side note, I just love to run it by you. But a thread I've been working on is really diving into that. I know I just posted one about that, but one of my theories, one of my thoughts is that we have a window of where our brains understand the world as it is because of technology. And if we go before that window or we're after that window, or we try to envision ourselves before or after that window, it's very difficult to do. And as technology gets faster, that window shrinks. And so, maybe 1,000 years ago it was a century, and now maybe it's a few decades, and maybe in a century it's a few years. And I wonder, is it even nonsensical to try to price Bitcoin? Because if we assume Bitcoin survives and it exits that window to where we can't even envision, we'll be exchanging Bitcoin for technologies that we can't even conceive of yet. And so, people ask me, will Bitcoin go to $1 million or $10 million or $100 million? And I don't know, for me, that's where my headspace is. It's like, not only is it going to those absurd numbers in fiat terms, but what if it goes so far beyond our wildest imaginations because it's in a world that we can't even envision? So I'm sure you agree with that mostly, but I'd love to hear any nuance you have on that.
Yeah, the only thought is I don't think about price at all.
Yeah.
I think about, you have a bearer instrument that is decentralized and secure with unlimited velocity inside that bearer instrument and a new network emerging. So that network doesn't require debt to function. That network doesn't to create value. So that value exchange is instant, final, all over the world. And there's nothing, and as that network grows, that network effect adds more value to each person on that network, and forever. Like, it's actually a network effect. This is the mind-boggling thing. Most network effects eventually fail because of centralization. So because if you looked at Google, or if you looked at YouTube, or if you looked at Twitter today,
Or Facebook.
Facebook, as they centralize, they have to make decisions that hurt people, that make decisions, and for some people versus others. And so, but they're really powerful as they're growing, right? Those, but then and that's why people stay. Early adopters to it get so much value. They get seen. They couldn't be seen before, and now they get seen. Their content gets seen by lots of other people, and then it attracts more and more people, and it races to, and it centralizes. What if you had a network effect that it had the same process but stayed decentralized and secure, and that means that we participate in the value forever, all of the people, like not just a couple people, all of the people, and it stays. So you have a network effect that literally goes on forever onto something like this, and it makes it more decentralized and secure. And the price is falling as a result of that network effect. Means you live your life with way less work, right? Because it's not required, because that productivity drives prices down, and you have more time. That's what this new system looks like, but it's so hard to see, and people are so scared because they're so scared because they're living in this system that looks exactly the opposite, and they have less and less time to think. And as they have less and less time to think, and they're working harder and harder and harder, they can't explore this like you and I are talking about now. So they spend their time trapped in the system, making that system stronger, when it's really quite simple what this is doing, what this transition looks like. Now, from a different part, if you knew some of these things, if you knew what this looks like and had the time to be able to spend looking at, okay, these are two different systems, this is a transition, then you would probably want to build all your time where the transition was going, because that would be the best use of your time, the highest best use of your time than in the existing fiat world that was being destroyed. And so similar to looking at the train before the dawn of the horse, like where was the economic value, and where were or the advent of the internet, and what came out of that as a result of people who saw it, and what didn't, where were people before. So there's just so much opportunity. There's so many businesses taking off that are going to create the new rails of commerce. And I encourage my kids just to look deeper into these spaces, because when there's problems in the world, there's tons of opportunity to create value to solve those problems. And it all lives in this space today.
And if you know that you're going to be fairly rewarded for the problems that you solve, and that that's not going to be harvested from you or manipulated away from you or your children, to me, I wonder how much faster is productivity and these costs falling to the marginal cost of production. I wonder how much faster is that change going to be atop of those rails, that protocol, that bedrock and foundation that doesn't have that instability that we're used to now.
Yeah.
Things change so fast now. I wonder to what degree faster will they change once this has occurred?
Two things on that. It would be hard to see. It would be hard to have an appropriate measure of that happening unless you're through Bitcoin, right? So the measure will be Bitcoin prices falling against Bitcoin. Everything else would be a mismeasurement from the system. And in that other piece I wrote too, it is that all money is information. You don't actually want more money. We think we want more money, but it's a ledger describing what we have and what we think we need in our own minds to be able to get what we want. That's all it is. So if you have misinformation in the ledger, which is money, then you must, as a byproduct, have misinformation everywhere. Now think about, now we have that misinformation in the ledger. We're going to have misinformation everywhere. Let's automate that misinformation. What would society look like? How hard would it be to try to figure out what was going on through that misinformation, and who would benefit from that misinformation? So,
and the almost terrifying thing to me, it's concerning to me that some people seem clueless about this, but frankly it's almost more concerning that people seem aware that this is happening. People talk about the algorithm, or they talk about the system, or they shake their fist. I think everyone can feel that misinformation is permeating every level of society and growing, and it's almost terrifying to me that even though everyone feels it, it's the hurdle in our brains to understand where that problem actually lies is so great that it's,
Because
yeah,
we all want to think, and that's why when I said I try to disprove the hypothesis and try to look deep on where could Bitcoin fail, what does that look like, and from a first principles level, is because I understand that, and I understand it in everybody I see, and if everyone I see thinks they have perfect information, yet they don't,
yeah,
then that must be for me too, right? I have to take that as face value, that it has to
yeah,
be for me. And what do you do? What do you do to try to solve that in yourself to make sure that you don't fall into that same trap?
mm-hmm,
Because, and it's only then, kind of through that critical lens. Okay, my model of the world, all of my predictions, all of my observations are matching my model of the world, and it's actually getting better and better and better.
yeah,
When that's true, then you're not trying to, oh, what happened here? It's just, and if your model of the world, if you're being surprised today, then your model of the world is likely wrong.
yeah. And for me, just like you're saying, for me, that's the exciting and terrifying thing for me is because it's like I remember thinking, oh, maybe in 5 years there'll be a nation that adopts Bitcoin as legal tender. Then you had El Salvador. Maybe in 10 years, or a few years or whatever, maybe we'll have some sort of banking problem. And then just last month in March we had that for the first time, or at least the very tip beginning of it. And it's alarming how quick these things are happening. And I wonder what could theoretically be next down the pipe. But at the same time, even though within the ledger that relies on theft to survive, even though the future only looks darker and darker, at the same time it's equally optimistic because that also means that on the ledger that doesn't require theft to survive, the future is only brighter and brighter. So
It
anyway,
really is optimistic. It
yeah,
really is optimistic. Why wouldn't you want to benefit from being a node in a network where all the output of all intelligence on the planet flows to you in the form of lower prices? But I'm really surprised people wouldn't want that, right? And there was no way that anybody could co-opt that from you. It
yeah,
was all of us for all of us.
yeah,
The free market would work perfectly. Entrepreneurs would work perfectly in there. The You would constantly create value until as prices fell, everyone would benefit from that, and you
yeah,
would benefit more as you were trying to create that to happen for society.
hmm,
So I don't think, and when people talk about libertarian or this or whatever,
yeah,
I think all of these labels are constructs of different times when we didn't have a money like this. There's never in
yeah,
history been a money that could be decentralized and secure. And so it required political systems that effectively said, by law, we're going to inscribe these rights to the society. Those laws that inscribed freedom of the individual and to society provided really great economies, because of all of those individual actors creating value. And then over time, the laws changed to be able to support because money is superordinate than laws, and money gets corrupted. So we're just in a system. We're just in a system change that money can't be corrupted from this system.
I'm glad that you're taking the time to learn about Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin's potential future value, both in terms of political currency units and on society as a whole. And I'm really glad that you're taking the effort to study and educate yourself about Bitcoin. However, I must make this message incredibly clear. If you are learning about Bitcoin, you must begin also learning about self-custody and taking possession of your own keys. This is really, really important. You can watch as many YouTube videos as you want talking about how Bitcoin is going to skyrocket in fiat price and how the number is going to go up. You can talk about that all you want. You can daydream about this kind of vertical spike action for Bitcoin. You can daydream about this all you want. But my encouragement to you is that this is not a meme. This is not something to be taken lightly. We can think that this is a good thing, and it is a good thing ultimately for Bitcoin's long-term adoption. But this is real. Okay, this really happens in countries. It may not happen in your country for some time. It may happen in a stair-step fashion, but this is not a meme. This is not a joke. And so, therefore, you need to take self-custody really, really seriously. Okay. I work full time in self-custody solutions for people. I help people set up their multi-sig vaults. I help people set up their estate plans. I help people with a collaborative custody partnership and collaborative custody models. Okay. This is a chart of the amount of interest we have at the Bitcoin Advisor, the company I work at. Okay. This is not me personally. This is the whole company. We've been in business 7 years. Not a single client of ours has ever lost a single sat. Okay. And we have a good number of clients. And this is our demand. My point in showing you this chart, my point in showing you this message right now is that it is increasingly urgent, increasingly important that you begin taking self-custody very seriously. I'm telling you, I'm on the inside of this all day, every day, 6 days a week, and demand for self-custody is skyrocketing. Okay. The kinds of clients we have, the number of clients we have, the conviction in the clients we have, it is only going up. Okay. And people are booking meetings with me weeks, okay, in advance. In some cases, over a month in advance. And we are in bear market. Okay. This chart right here is from October 2023. Okay. Like incredible low interest globally in Bitcoin. And our demand is still skyrocketing, it's still spiking. And my encouragement is that if we have a bull run, if we have parabolic spikes such as this, where Bitcoin goes rapidly upwards in terms of price, if we have these periods of time, okay, transaction fees are going to spike. Okay, exchanges are going to halt withdrawals. Okay, people are going to panic. They're going to smash by any price. Okay, it's going to be increasingly difficult to have any time with people to help you in your self-custody setups. So first and foremost, whatever you do, whether you work with me at the Bitcoin Advisor, whether you go somewhere else, whether you figure it out on your own, whatever the case, please start figuring out self-custody. Hot wallets, cold wallets, cold wallets, single sig, multi-sig, whatever you do, just start figuring it out now, because I'm increasingly alarmed by the number of Bitcoiners that do not have self-custody. So please, if you have any Bitcoin self-custody, but especially if you have a large amount of Bitcoin in self-custody, please start taking this stuff seriously, because it's only going to be increasingly important in the future. And so if you like to work with me, if you like to hear my opinions, perspectives, and ideas on this topic, you can find me at the Bitcoin Advisor. This is precisely why I work at the Bitcoin Advisor, because I believe this is such an important topic here. Okay. You can find me there. You can have expert guidance on how to self-custody Bitcoin, to buy, secure, and store it properly for the long term. We can have tailored strategies for you, what your long-term vision is, both for yourself, your own individual future, your retirement, and for your future generations as well. Again, multi-sig vaults, estate plans, all of these things for you. Okay, you can just book a free meeting with me here, and the link down below in the description. Again, the first consultation is completely free, where we can talk about your priorities and see if there's a value add both for you and for the Bitcoin Advisor as well. And again, our goal is to help you have generational wealth for you and your loved ones and your children without losing sleep. Okay. And that's why not only do you get a free initial consultation, but you have dozens and dozens of pages of education about multi-sig, self-custody, how to store your Bitcoin properly, things to avoid, things to pursue. Okay. Again, dozens and dozens of pages of free education for you to be learning about this increasingly important, increasingly urgent topic. Okay. And then you can learn further about the Bitcoin Advisor and why we provide much more value for half the cost of our competitors. You can learn about all this and more in that link in the description, where you can book a free consultation with me at the Bitcoin Advisor. So again, whatever you do, whether you work with me at the Bitcoin Advisor or you try to figure out on your own, please just start taking action now. Because in a couple of years, higher and higher net worth people are going to be entering the space and demanding self-custody. Okay, more and more companies, more and more charities, more and more pension funds, more and more churches, all these things, all these groups of people, all these entities are going to be coming into Bitcoin very quickly, and they'll be willing to pay the transaction fees. They'll be willing to pay whatever fiat price and get for their sats. They'll be willing to do the self-custody as fast as possible. And so my encouragement to you, again, I'm glad you're enjoying these videos. I really appreciate you subscribing and commenting and being a part of these videos and increasing your Bitcoin education. But please, please, please do not stop at the end of this video. Immediately after you watch the end of this video, please start taking your self-custody seriously, whether that's with me at the Bitcoin Advisor, again, link in the description, or it's on your own. Whatever the case, please just do it. Thank you.
One of my metaphors on Twitter that people really liked was that Monopoly game, and that you have a board of Monopoly, and you have the currency of that game, and there's a certain set of rules, but you also require a banker to manage the rules. And you know what happens when you have one game of Monopoly transitioning to another game of Monopoly, and the new one doesn't require the banker to enforce the rules because the game itself enforces the rules. And then obviously you have to get into what happens to underlying money within those two games and that transition there. So but I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think people don't want to hear that. And I think ultimately, and this is something I really wanted to ask you, I think ultimately it comes down, a lot of it, to emotions and one's willingness to admit that they could be wrong. And online, it's often said that Bitcoin's an IQ test. You buy Bitcoin the price you deserve and all that. And I wonder, what if Bitcoin is not an IQ test? What if it's even more so an EQ test? And it's not just about intelligence. It's also about your emotional state. And I don't know, I wonder if you've ever thought about that, or perhaps it's something else entirely, or some blend of them. But do you think emotions play a larger part than...
Yeah, and I think I just did a podcast with Breedlove on this topic. We don't see the world as it is. We see a world as it is through our filter, our filter bubble. And if I saw, if I'm a victim in the world, then everything I wouldn't see. I would see that exact feeding back at me. I would see it's everyone else's fault. Everything always happens to me, and it would feed back to me if I showed up somewhere else in the world. So we see the world not as it is. We see the world as our bubble of information needs it to be. I think in that so if you get your reaction from hate, right? And anybody can do whatever they want, but then there will be a small subgroup who will come to you and say, "You're so great because I like that too," and they'll do the same thing, and it'll feed back to you, and then you can see this magnify itself everywhere and on social media. Whatever you determine is your subgroup will feed that back to you, and actually it'll repel other groups. So you're seeing the world as you see it, not as it is, and other people are seeing it as it. So their world is just as accurate for them as it is, as yours is for you. I just try to stay above that noise. I try not to react when somebody says something terrible on Twitter or something like that about me or about something I said. It's one of the three things. One, they're right, and I can update my model and take some information into trying to make that better. Two, they're wrong, right, and it doesn't matter. Or three, they're trying to bait you into a conversation to try to gain awareness that you're when I watch people take the bait all the time, okay, you do you. If that's what your time should do over and over and over, if that's how you want to live your life and be in that cycle over and over, then great. But I don't want to.
I am so glad you talked about that, because this actually is something I really wanted to ask you. but and frankly, that for selfish reasons. Also, I think people would find value in it too. But I think it applies to things, not just Twitter. For me, I've gone from virtually zero people following me or giving me feedback on my work and what I've written to now all of a sudden hundreds and hundreds of comments and thousands of reactions. And thankfully, I believe more or less I've been handling it well, but it's a lot for a 23-year-old. It's a complete shock to have all this positivity of people saying that I did all these wonderful, or I helped them have a new perspective, or this, that, the other, and all these other people with all this negativity. And that was the question I had for you, is because our brains aren't designed for that. Our brains are used to small communities of a few dozen or 100 people, whatever. Just all this information. So for me right now, obviously I have my personal example, but I think it's also true for other people that have passionate topics, and they are bombarded with news headlines, or perhaps they're a Bitcoiner and they have family, friends, coworkers that they want to share the idea of Bitcoin with them, but there's that gap there. And so whether it's someone like me that's trying to navigate the Twitterverse, or it's someone that's trying to educate other people about Bitcoin, or perhaps it's someone in a completely different scenario, how would you advise them to navigate this increasingly fast world, at least right now, with increasing noise, to balance that act of wanting to help other people and engage with them, because like you said, one of those three groups are people that are wrong, and you want to help bring them to that side. So I'm not perhaps wording my question that well, but I guess my
I
point
think
is,
I know. I think
yeah.
I know where I think I know where you're going. Ask your real motivation. Ask the why to you when you say you want to help someone, right? Ask the why to that, and why does it need to be you? And follow that honestly, not just your surface answer on what that looks like. But when people say you changed their life, right? You want to do more, right? And
Yeah.
and it could easily turn into feeding your ego at expense of a network that's that it doesn't need you, it doesn't need me, it doesn't need and so
Yeah.
I try to judge my time on, am I doing the things that are cohesive for my life, my family, my kids, my wife, my friends, and it comes across as selfless, but it's actually selfish, because I do it for me first. I do it for finding that it's with integrity, but I could easily fall into the trap of it has to be me, and if I did that, I put myself above Bitcoin, right? And I deserve all of what comes next, right? Because you can't separate yourself from the network. You can't objectively think. In fact, why do you want to orange pill somebody? When we say that, shouldn't we actually want just to pose the question in their mind that they orange pill themselves, right? And they don't even need to think about us as doing it. So us being, we have to be the one, is really ego driven.
Yeah.
But I get
idea
it
is
because
more
it feels
important.
so, it feels so good. It feels so good when you can help others and you want to do more, but that can capture you, and it can take you on a path that you do a whole bunch of stuff that isn't really in harmony of the things you want to do, and you wouldn't see it. Just like, because you can see that if you look around society, you can see that nature in somebody else. Let's use Elizabeth Warren as an example, right? Let's use her as an
All right,
example.
here we go. Okay.
Or let's use Elon Musk as an example. And again,
Or both. Yeah, sure.
they might be really great people underneath this, but they're caught in exactly what I just said. So if you were Elizabeth Warren and part of your base, a whole bunch of your base, thought you were the only one who could save them, right? Would you be listening to any other information that might that might rip apart who you are as a person, because it means everything you were doing to your base was exactly opposite? Would it be easier to not hear the truth, and because you had to be the person that mattered for those people? And so I don't know if she doesn't know, but I would just say it would be really easy to fall into that trap of that illusion, because of what she would feel as love from a certain base and hate from another base, reinforcing are exactly there. Elon very similar. Elon very similar. If everyone said you were the only one that could save the world, and you created these incredible businesses, and you're the one that's going to save communication for the entire planet, right? You're the one that fight that other group, and one group is all over him, and one group is telling him he's the savior of the world. Would it be easy to believe that narrative? And so if you can see it in other people, realize there's a piece of it in you too.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think today is the example that we're recording this on the day that Elon incorporated Dogecoin, I guess, to Twitter, and it's like that's your exact point, that Elon has bought and managing Twitter now in the name of free speech, basically fighting this other group that is oppressing free speech, sure, but at the same time, he's also a part of it, just a parallel centralized system. And
New face on a different problem.
Yeah.
My guy wins versus those other bad guys. Us versus
Yeah.
them.
Yeah,
And
it's like,
it's all on both sides of it.
mm-hmm.
It's nonsense. Can't be solved from a system based on manipulated money.
I would like to thank today's sponsor, Bull Bitcoin, for making this episode possible. Bull Bitcoin is Canada's most trusted Bitcoin exchange since 2013, built around the ethos of separation of money and state, of course, and leveraging its mission to end central banks forever. At Bull Bitcoin, they value security and privacy incredibly well as their top priority, and they take it very seriously upon themselves to help empower individuals and their clients with the most potent form of money known to man, Bitcoin. Head to bullbitcoin.com today and get started with your account creation. Contact Bull's best in the business customer support team at any point throughout the process to request assistance. They'll be more than happy to help. So please check them out, bullbitcoin.com. Take control of your money. Thanks.
So if all of us humans have that, where we all have that little bit of ego and we all have this little bit of us, how do we pursue eradicating that in the entirety of our life, and can it be eradicated?
I think it can. I think, in fact, I actually think that's what's happening in Bitcoin over time. Is you will have, this will take a long time to play out, but it'll be literally an increase in consciousness for society, because we're encoding the best of us into the network for the best of us from the network. That's what that's what it looks like. And so again, it's just a ledger based on truth, right?
You can't have a lie on the ledger.
You can't have a lie on the ledger. It's just constantly updating the truth, and it's impossible to break that. And so and that has totally different incentive structure than the world that we live in today. And that incentive structure literally changes humanity. It's a big deal. It's hard to describe in just a quick podcast or anything else, because we are part of that system with a faulty incentive system, structure, and all of our actions, or most of our actions, therefore must be inside that faulty incentive structure. And so, if we are all inside that structure, then it would be really hard to see what a new incentive structure based on truth would look like. What would the emergent complex behavior of society look like based on truth?
That's really profound there. I think this is going to take a long time to unfold, but I think it's very exciting. And I think the beautiful thing about it is that even though it might take a long time to unfold, I think that process is already here. Our mutual friend Greg Foss and Saylor and all these other Bitcoiners that we know, pretty much it's just that if we assume this thing survives and we assume that humanity has a future, then to me it seems that Bitcoin continually will be increasingly the most valuable thing that we have, because at least the way I view it, money is the technology at which we exchange value of all the technologies, and so it seems to me that it should increasingly be the most valuable thing on the face of the planet, and not just the code itself, not just Bitcoin itself, but the people a part of that network continually will be more and more aligned on that similar incentive structure. So
that's what I think that's what you're seeing. I think that's when I think about the friends, the people if you know a Bitcoiner who's gone all the way down the rabbit hole, there's a really high chance that you agree on most things. You might have differences around the edges. They still might have ego. You might, but around the most important things, you probably agree on kind of 90% of the world. So essentially what you're saying is, okay, these people have integrity, right?
Yeah.
Trust is a lot easier. Everything else is a lot easier with integrity that can't be bought, right? So you're right? Everything
Yeah.
else is easier. So
Yeah.
you have a bias to cooperate. It's just the entire system is a bias to cooperate instead of a bias to cheat.
Yeah. That's really something. That's really something. So wow, we have really got off the deep end there. I know we're running short of, or we're over an hour now, but I'd love for the people listening that hear all this, and it seems way out there still. What are practical things you think people can do in making this bridge to the other side? What do you think are the questions people should ask themselves? We mentioned questions earlier. I'm wondering if you were looking back at your former self where you didn't understand this, what are the few questions that you think would be the most provocative or the most helpful in going down the rabbit hole and understanding these two systems, understanding everything we've talked about? What do you think those questions are, and what do you think those steps are that people can take to where this goes from just some abstract concept that they hear two guys on a digital podcast talking about is something that they can actually implement in their own life?
That's why I started where I did in the book. Is technology deflationary, right? Because if that's true, then anything stopping those prices falling to the marginal cost of production must centralize. Anything. So if you just start there, and you just said, do the things I use with technology save me time, create more value, right? And you think technology is moving faster and faster, then that would be a really great start to understand why something has to allow that to happen. Right? It's why you need a system to allow that to happen, because otherwise, that centralizing function essentially steals more and more of that productivity and has to. So that's why I start with that, because it's easy. Because everybody uses technology, they use it all over. They can see themselves in it, and now you have a pattern interrupt that is a big question on what people think, right? But then I would say the next thing is there's a lot of people that believe a productive society requires inflation. And they believe that because they've always grown up in a debt-based system. All their pre-models, the things they read are in a debt-based system, and a debt-based system does require inflation to prosper, right? And so you can't change. So that belief is true for a debt-based system. So, and that's why that system can go on, and it will go on for some time. It'll get worse and worse. It'll get more chaotic. But you have to step out and say, well, what would it look like in a new system that didn't require that amount of debt? Where if the debt's already insolvent, how would you pay that back? What would that look like? Would you just make up more monetary units to pay it back, or would you let everything collapse? What would be the probabilities of different outcomes in different countries? What would that look like? Another thing I think for people, some people kind of worry about Operation Choke Point and such. I don't at all.
That's one of the questions I got multiple times asking you. Yeah. Well, so why don't you worry at all?
So, and potentially in the short term, and I already touched a little bit on the communication channels have to be corrupted next. They have to be centralized, and they have to take your individual rights and freedoms to be able to implement CBDC, to maybe implement those things. Those things are coming. They will come. But every time those things come, effectively, you are screaming at people, you better buy Bitcoin as fast as you can, right? You're screaming at other nations to say, the only way the system works is by absolute totalitarian control and manipulation of money. And we're going, and this is how they're laying out the playbook about what's going to happen. And people don't think it's going to happen. So, so as you're screaming this from the rafters, because it's all based on theft or misinformation, you're actually highlighting truth. And more people are building to it. And if you saw what was happening from my seat, the people building to it, I just imagine, try to be a government and try to stop technology right? And try to stop technology, open technology, open decentralized technology, and everything that's coming on top of that layer. They're looking back 5 years at what was, and they can't stop that. They have no idea what's coming.
5
No
years
clue.
from now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They have no clue. If you see all the innovation in this space and what's coming, no clue.
Are you able to touch on that a little bit? I'm sure many people, including myself, would be interested if, I don't know if you're able to or not, but I'd be really fascinated to hear.
So I would say, and let me not right now, just because
Yep, sure.
as because as we do, as some of these companies launch their next what they're doing, you just think, okay, I have a system that is let me back. If there was so much power in a system, and let's say in that system, this is an if at the top of that system there were control points and there were not very good people at the top, right? I don't think it looks like that, but just imagine a system favors a wealthy at the expense of everyone else, and it reinforces that, and those names become elite, right? And the elite really rest on theft from a majority of the population of the world, and we call them elite when it's based on a theft. Which is not alone. But if that system relied on that, and it was 10,000 times bigger than Bitcoin, you would have to expect any single thing that advanced Bitcoin to get attacked like crazy from that system. But most people would be in that system and they would be corrupted by that information because they wouldn't be outside of the system yet. So they would believe what they read. They would believe all the things. And so if you're thinking about strategy to be able to advance what's happening and all the component parts of Nostr and Bitcoin and Fedimint and all of the different things that are coming on top of these layers that actually advance it faster and faster together, you have to be really thoughtful in the way you're going to roll those out.
Present information. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is not just theoretical. I think it's true, because Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, as an example, both of them view Bitcoin as a threat on the dollar. And both of their voter bases, I'm sure, to a certain degree, believe them, perhaps for different reasons. Perhaps one political party's voters have different views on Bitcoin and why Bitcoin's bad than a different group. But I think you're right about that we can already see that with Bitcoin, and I can only imagine for the future layers what that misinformation is going to look like. But just one of these things that you've already done this work, and you've done it on Bitcoin, and you've done it on the existing financial system, I suspect, right? Maybe you haven't done it on the existing financial system as deep as Lynn Alden, or no,
maybe, right?
But
but you've done this work at depth on both systems. So you understand how the plumbing works on both systems, right? And similarly, I do. I know how the plumbing works, but most people gain their value not on the plumbing level. They don't care about that. They gain their value on everything else on top of that, and they just live their lives on top, not knowing that something's broken underneath. And so their house is going up in value because of monetary easing and everything else, and they think they're winning, and everything, everything's good, and all of the other things that are built. Google just came out with a new thing and they're building on top of this centralized risk over and over and over again, and they don't look inside the plumbing until the inflation rate turns into 10%, right? And that theft moves from 2% predictably to a much higher rate. Or if that was going to have a deflation or a collapse, they would vote for more theft, right? So because they don't understand how the plumbing works, how it leads to these outcomes all over the world. They haven't thought through the second, third, or fourth order derivatives of the thing that they're talking about. Nor, even if so most people haven't done that. And a very small percentage of people have done that at the depth on Bitcoin to understand how that system is totally different. Because we don't get value at that layer, right? We get value on top of those layers. So Bitcoin today when you're teaching about Bitcoin, you're trying to teach that complex topic at the plumbing layer. When all of the products and services that are going to be built on top of that are going to give people
Yeah.
crazy value that they don't even realize that it's happening on Bitcoin, and it's going to advance to billions of people through delivering value in ways that education is a harder way there.
So what would you say? So if I'm understanding this right, you're saying that because you have one system with the foundation and this other system with foundation, and even though the people over here are living on top, it's not until the structures on top of that foundation, the new system, then they can just transition over, because to them that's what makes sense. That makes perfect
So
sense.
when I talk about the rails, the bridge to the other side, I'm talking about Lightning was one piece of that connection. We are all pieces of that connection. When you're using Lightning Network, try two ways of bringing somebody onto Bitcoin. Teach them everything we're trying to teach them on a podcast right now, or send them a Lightning transaction that is have them download a wallet and have send them money that's immediate, final, and it costs nothing. And they could send it anywhere in the world, and watch the reaction, because I've done this all over the world to cab drivers, and now they want to talk about the deeper level.
Yeah.
Right.
Wait a second. Yeah.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
And so all of that level, all of that, those layers on top of Bitcoin are just emerging to provide that value that's going to take the abstraction we're talking about and abstract it away and just make life easier. And
I
it'll
think.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry. It is just, that's the way to bring billions onto Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I look back at the internet. Obviously, I was too young to remember too much, but I think it's the same way, that the internet was around for a long time, and it grew and grew and grew and increased in size, increased in value, sure, but then really with the addition of search engines and social media and email and all these platforms on top of that, TCP/IP, that's really what brought the people on, and that to me is what makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
And
TCP/IP was late 60s by DARPA.
Yeah,
And that's why that's such an important way to think about it. You can't see what's available on the next layer until the layer's already there. Right? The innovation, the companies that form on top of that layer can't even form until the technology protocol is ready for that next layer. So in that takes time, and then the companies form on top of that, and they build value. And if the base layer was unstable, then everything on top of it would be risked. It would all fall apart. It would all fall apart. So what's happened for the last 14 years? Bitcoin, the base layer, has become incredibly decentralized, incredibly stable, secure, and now you're just getting second layer with Lightning, Liquid, a bunch of others, which comes back down and talks to base layer every 10 minutes, but without sacrificing the base layer. And you have other layers building on top and integrated. And some of these, so the type of imagination that, say, a new entrepreneur can create, where they couldn't 5 years ago. They couldn't create some of the stuff that's available, so they went and created things on Ethereum, which had an unstable base, right? Which had a centralizing base.
Proof of stake.
And, exactly. So all of these things were built because Bitcoin was unrelenting in decentralization and security, and couldn't sacrifice the base layer. But now you have an entire ecosystem building on top of that. That is is literally the most exciting place to be in commerce. I can't believe more people aren't doing that. So if people want to know what to do, I know from hiring probably thousands of people over that when people came to me in different businesses and told me how much they loved my business and they knew about my business and they wanted to be a part of it, they kind of got to the front of the line before I would put out a job spec. Does it make sense? Right. So
because they're excited about the mission.
Because and now think about this. There's a whole bunch of Bitcoin companies out there that are emerging, and if you don't want to start one yourself, you may have the skills at one of those companies to say, I can help you drive this next thing. And so I would get out there and meet some of the companies that are emerging. Talk to them about what do they need. How can you help if you're looking for opportunities in this? Don't just wait until somebody puts a job spec out. Go and meet people, see what they're doing, and get excited about what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. I have one final quick question for you. You've gone on so many shows. You've had people ask you so many things about this and other topics. What is the one question that you wish you were asked, or perhaps the one question you wish you asked more often? And then, of course, what's the answer to that?
I don't know if I can't think of a question I haven't been asked. Yeah. In fact, one of the hardest things in doing so many shows, sometimes you're on, sometimes you're off, sometimes and answering similar questions over and over again and different things. I wonder how many times for me, it feels like I've said the same thing over and over and over again. And even I looked quickly just before this podcast. I couldn't answer some of them. I will afterwards. But on Twitter to what questions should people ask me? Here's what I found surprising, because it's so clear in my head that just because it's clear in my head and I said it a whole bunch of different ways doesn't mean it's clear in a whole bunch of other people's heads. They're still trapped in the existing system, spending most of their time in the existing system, thinking and dragging the biases from what they think the opposite that system looks like and all the baggage from that into this protocol, into what's happening here. And that's and I saw it in a bunch of the questions that you were asked to ask me. And I wonder, wow, people have heard. So one of two things. I'm really terrible. I'm really terrible at explaining things, which could be, right? which is a possibility. And I know I ramble around, so
It's above zero.
Very terrible. Or minds don't change that hard. They hold on to their belief set, and they change really slowly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end. I appreciate your time so much. This has been so exciting for me, and I'm just glad to be a part of this. It's been so great to interact with you and other people online and now here with this, and I'm excited for what's next. And I hope that...
Congrats, by the way, and I really mean that. Take the torch, tell lots of people. Every single person in this ecosystem matters. Not just in this ecosystem, every single person matters. We can all learn from other people, and I love that what you're doing in this space, because I think you are bringing a whole bunch more people into this to understand this or to ask questions.